Hello and welcome to today's webinar, where we'll discuss how companies can greatly improve their analytics capabilities by incorporating data outside their four walls. This webinar is brought to you by Previdere. Previdere is a predictive analytics company that analyzes and identifies the best external and internal leading indicators for business performance. With a proprietary AI-based engine, Previdere develops predictive models by industry, region, product, or consumer segment for enterprises worldwide. The insights discussed today are derived by using the Previdere software. If you have any questions, please submit them in the questions section of your GoToWebinar app or webpage. In the interest of time, we will answer all questions after the webinar concludes to provide the best information. My name is Pavan Murthy. I'm Senior Director of Marketing at Previdere. And on this webinar, we are excited to have John Sydnor, Executive Vice President at Prosper Insights and Analytics. John has extensive expertise in creating new sales marketing teams, go-to-market strategies, change management, and brand execution. Prosper Analytics is a well-known provider of business intelligence and analytics solutions that gives clients a holistic, historic, and predictive view of their customer. John, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
We're also joined by Jessica Dolezal, Customer Success Manager at Previdere. Jessica has worked across verticals to apply data to business problems. She is most intent on driving towards sustainable solutions that bring measurable improvement to her customers' business. She studied economics at The Ohio State University and holds various NABE certificates in econometrics. Jessica, thank you for joining us as well.
I'm happy to be here.
All right. So this webinar will have the following agenda. First, we will talk about just the value of external data and what it means to businesses. Next, we're going to discuss what are the best uses of external data as it relates to improving business performance or gaining insights. Next, we'll talk about actual examples, not only of the data itself, but sources and where you can actually get it from. And then lastly, an overview of survey and purchase intent data, which can be very critical for understanding consumer behavior. So Jessica, let's start with you. We know that billions have been spent on business intelligence, data, and analytics. Why add to the mix with this concept of external data, and what's the value behind that?
Good question to get us started. So while analyzing internal and historical performance is valuable, most companies are making decisions without the entire picture. And that means they aren't factoring in how the world outside their four walls impacts their business. We hear many times from our prospective customers that they know that they need to take the outside view into account. It typically does not surprise them to hear that in our experience at Previdere, we've seen external factors have as much as 85% of impact on sales or profitability. But few have figured out how to incorporate external factors of some kind. And in fact, Gartner says that as few as 26% are doing it. And by having a holistic picture, both internal and external drivers of the business, leadership teams of any company can start answering some very critical questions with greater accuracy.
So it seems like there's a great opportunity for companies to utilize external data, but what are the uses of this, and where does that value come from, the value behind it? Can you speak to that a little further?
I'd be happy to. So some of the uses that we see of external data include identifying past trends, benchmarking against industry growth, and identifying leading indicators, and of course, understanding consumer behavior. I've actually pulled up some examples that we can take a look at. On the screen right now, you'll see real personal consumption expenditures. This is a measure of consumer spending in the U.S. economy, which actually makes up roughly 72% of GDP. So it's a macroeconomic factor that we look at to identify what may have happened, for example, in a CPG company or a retail company. We may want to see how did their performance line up against real PCE For example, in 2016, there was a period of time where things started to slow down. We had many customers coming to us and saying, can you help us understand what's happening right now? Is it something internal to our business? Is there actually something broader going on in the economy that we should be aware of? And we were able to simply turn to a factor like this to identify whether there was something internally or externally happening that they should be aware of. More specifically, this works with other industries outside of CPG and retail as well. There's a lot of data out there for industrial production to use as benchmark data across industries. So I've pulled up an example here for production of hardware. So someone like a Home Depot, Lowe's, those types of home improvement types of stores may care to benchmark themselves against this type of data, and there are very specific industry and sub-industry type of data that we can use to benchmark against. And so I'll transition to the next slide to show you what is a really powerful example of using external data to identify leading indicators of the future. So oftentimes we hear from customers that they are familiar with this type of economic or external data. So things come up like employment or GDP as examples of that type of data that they're familiar with. What we can help them to understand is that not all data is going to be a leading signal of their business. So on the screen, you'll see an example for what is a good leading employment factor of industrial production. So in each one of the charts, there's a red line, which is the measure for total industrial production in the United States. And in the first chart, we're comparing that to the employment level, which is the black line. In the second chart, we're comparing it to job openings in the purple line. Now, employment level and job openings are both measures of essentially the health of the labor situation in the United States. But employment level, which is a much more commonly reported, you see it a lot when the new monthly employment numbers come out, people are talking about it, but it in fact is a lagging indicator of total production. And we can see that actually when we start to interact with the charts here on the screen. I'm moving the chart to get this nice peak and valley alignment, and you'll see that it's actually lagging by 3 months.
So what means, I'm sorry, Jess. So what that means is that the industrial production changes ahead of the employment levels. So it would not be a good leading indicator. Is that correct?
Exactly. So while it might be valuable to understand, the employment level, it's not going to give you the signal that you might be looking for as for what's to come next. And so what we can help people to understand is that there's actually better indicators out there of the labor market, which are in fact leading. So job openings is a great leading indicator. If you think about employers that need to make adjustments in their labor situation, their employees, because, things are picking up, business is getting stronger, they need to hire more people to manage the workload, and then you would see that as a result in job openings. So that's why you'll tend to see that that's actually a leading signal as opposed to employment, which is something that takes place after maybe a later change to come. And we can see it represented in the both visually and statistically when we look at the correlation between these values, to start to understand what are the signals that show me the future of the employment situation.
Now, the last one we have is understanding consumer behavior. John, is there insights you can provide based off of your experience and what you guys do at Prosper?
Without question. Look, everything that the two of you have noted thus far is spot on. We really believe that in the behavioral school of economics, the most important variable in the economy is the consumer. That's really why we have an almost maniacal focus on the consumer. And our data shows that, the consumer is keenly aware of how they want their data to be used to provide a customer journey experience for them or not. So you can imagine changes with various demographics and age ranges that really go into how the consumer can be understood, how behavior truly is not just online behavior and clicks, but it also means, why people feel the way they do. What mediums do they have at their disposal, and what has a higher propensity to be consumed, and where can they reach those people? So as you think about external first-party data, particularly from an anonymous perspective, it obviously addresses privacy compliance issues, but it also seeks to complement the internal data and all the other data that consumers have provided to businesses, so that you can truly provide that 360-degree holistic view of the consumer. And the beauty of that is that as changes in spending habits begin to show up in the data, we can then look at what regional issues are going to be affecting that consumer. How does that spread amongst demographics? So being able to analyze all of this data to do various types of what we call data cuts and allow one to understand how changes in consumer habits are affecting both by a product level and how they're affected by a regional level, and then applying that to a demographic analysis truly allows you to look at that 360-degree holistic view of the customer and then be able to anticipate over time how those behaviors are going to be changing and how then you can react to that sensing of what is going on in the economy.
So whereas the other data could talk about the quantified aspects of how much they spend and what they're buying and what they're making, this talks about more the feeling, like what are they feeling and what is their sentiment.
Look, we believe that every single person that is engaged in some sort of consumable behavior has a personal economy that they have to respond to. And that personal economy could be things such as, am I secure in my job? Do I have children in college? What sort of expenses am I going to be facing in the next 30, 60, 90 days? That has a major effect of really driving the consumer to certain behaviors. And over time, we are able to identify trends, to look at signals, and the future intent of that consumer really bears itself out in the data.
Well, that's really fascinating. We're talking a lot about looking ahead and what's happening in the future. And Jessica, you had mentioned something about how external data can be used as a good leading indicator, and you touched upon it a little bit in the charts that you had shown. What makes a good leading indicator for businesses to use? And I presume that certain indicators are better than others, but what should companies look for, or analysts look for, when it comes to searching for a good leading indicator?
So what makes a good leading indicator is first that it is in fact leading. So we need to have a way to compare the product or category that we're looking at to these business signals and in fact see that there is a signal within the data that tells us that there's something to come for the product or category for which we are looking for. We also want to be able to measure that there is correlation between the data that we're looking at. So we want to find that there is a mathematical relationship that we can verify, and we can see additionally that there's a consistent history. We can see that over many business cycles, in fact, these things have been moving together. But more importantly than anything else, we need to make sure that it does in fact make sense. It's logical to the business. In fact, if we provide a forecast using leading indicators, we need to be sure that the stakeholders can stand up in front of their business and have confidence in the fact that these are true leading signals of their business, and that therefore giving a good signal for what is to come.
And let's see if we can find where this data comes from. Jessica, do you have any insights?
I do. So there are millions of external data sets out there and countless sources. But let's talk about some of the major categories that we focus on when working with customers to make sure we have a robust view of their external environment. So first, there's economic data, which are typically measures of production, prices, and volumes moved of certain goods and services. And they are often captured by national statistical organizations. So within the United States, sources such as the Federal Reserve and Bureau of Labor Statistics capture this information, while internationally, the World Bank is a good source because it has aggregated the data for most countries. There's also financial data, such as company fundamentals, which measure revenue and stock prices, which are easy to find publicly. However, by partnering with a data aggregator, it makes it easier to collect and consolidate this information. Demographic data is a category that we always take a look at for our customers, and understanding how the demographics that are line up with their business. And we look at data for population distribution, household income, housing, and this can be collected reliably from the Census Bureau. And we also like to look at weather. Weather is a fun one. We collect data from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, and this data gets extremely granular. But it's really interesting to see all of the uses, because different types of weather patterns can affect businesses differently. So looking at possibly just rainfall might make a difference in pizza sales, for example, but an insurance company might want to look at more severe type of weather to understand how that impacts their pricing situation. There's always got to be a component of consumer behavior included in the picture as well.
John, let's dive into the consumer behavior data that you are familiar with. How is this data collected? What's the methodology used? That'd be great to understand that.
Sure. So there are a number of different things that are affecting our industry. Number one, at a high level, GDPR, or the General Data Protection Regulation coming out of Europe. That's affecting the use of data and collection of data and the methodology that you use incredibly so. And you can see that really sort of germinating first in California with the California Consumers Protection Act, and that is having ripple effects all the way through to the United States Congress. Obviously, all data is really not valuable. Big data is one issue, good data is another. And I think when you look and understand that there is no true declaration of independence for all data, I think what we then do is look at how do we respond both to market forces, consumer forces, and regulatory sources. So when we think about how we collect our data, we always make sure, because we are first-party anonymous data, that we keep consumer privacy at the forefront of everything that we do. Thus, we look at collecting through sample providers. There's a very legal issue with your privacy and your data, and it's really keyed off of this terminology that's called personal identifiable information, or PII data. We make sure that we don't touch any PII data. In fact, we really have a large amount of investment in making sure, from a regulatory perspective, that we are not involved with the capture of that information. The other thing that we do is we allow the respondent, and on a monthly basis, we have between 7,000 and 8,000 individuals that come in and actually take our survey, and the resulting data set is really created as those individuals answer a number of different questions from a psychographic perspective, from a behavioral perspective, and also from a future intent perspective. And they really put that information directly into our database, but also getting at the core strength of what we think really affects the economy, and that is, what is the consumer feeling? What is the consumer saying they're interested in buying? And how does the consumer then look at executing that behavior? And as you well know, we are the outsourced research arm for the National Retail Federation. And every single month we allow this future intent data that we capture to inform the world's largest retail organization what they should and their clients should expect for the upcoming seasonal holiday, whatever that holiday may be. What they are saying they're going to be buying in the next 30 or 60 or 90 days, and where they're going to be buying that from a distribution perspective, from a channel perspective. And all those things go into the way we think about how to provide the highest amount of value for our clients.
Right. And who are the consumers of this kind of data typically when it comes to this kind of purchase intent?
Sure. So from an industry perspective, it's really anyone who has to sell something to consumers. And that may sound, very global in perspective, because it is. Some of the most important purchases of our data are in the industries of financial services, consumer packaged goods, and also retailers. Sure.
So, Jessica, does this kind of data also offer itself to being a good leading indicator for businesses? I think John touched upon the future intent. Is there an example you can provide that talks about how purchase intent data that comes in this case from Prosper into our app provide a leading signal for any kind of data that we're looking at?
Absolutely. And we see over and over again that the purchase intent data is a leading signal of what's to come for the products and categories that we create forecasts for. I actually have an example pulled up to share with you of laundry care. And in fact, we found this purchase intent data series, which explains the spending plan for men's casual clothing, but the category of purchasers is moms. So what this is effectively saying is that moms are planning to spend on men's casual clothing. So think of, their spending for their husbands, their fathers, their sons. And so if we perform the same exercise and we line up the data to see if this is in fact a leading indicator, we do get a stronger correlation in the data. You can start to see that what we call peak and valley alignment in the data, where the growth mirrors the growth in the spending intent, the purchasing intent data mirrors the laundry care sales. And we can see that now we've identified a great leading indicator that's much more specific to the business, helps us tell the story of what's really happening in the laundry care aisle better for our customers. And I think it makes a lot of sense that the moms are planning to go out spending more on this clothing category, and they're also going to need to wash those clothes, as I can relate to. So we've now identified this leading signal, which is what we're really trying to get to, is that more specific example that we see helps our customers better understand their categories.
As we are surveying the consumer, we ask them leading questions, future intent questions, that allow us to capture data on what they are planning on spending by category at what particular retailer for 90 days in the future. And the value of this future intent data is that it allows for the building of predictive analytics to have a roadmap into where the consumer is planning on spending their money.
Thank you, John. That was very insightful. It's great to understand how this data is collected as well as how it's used. Now, this brings us to the end of our webinar and some key takeaways. It should be no surprise that every industry is affected by external factors to some degree. It's just only recently do we have the computing power and the availability of the data that we can actually account for that. Now, this economic and consumer behavior data is out there. Many of it is publicly available or through vendors such as Prosper. This external data can also be understood as powerful leading indicators for the business. to predict when changes in demand will occur, when headwinds and tailwinds will occur from outside of the four walls of the company. And then to further understand the consumer, first-party anonymous data is there to understand the why and the feeling of what is going on in a consumer's mind, as well as understanding, as John put it, the personal economy of our consumers. Well, that concludes this webinar. I want to thank John Sydnor of Prosper Insights and Analytics for being our guest. Thank you very much, John.
Thank you very much. My pleasure, Pavan.
And thank you, Jessica, for your time and your insights today.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. And we want to hear from you now, the audience. And if you want to learn more about Previdere and how we've helped retail and CPG companies predict consumer demand and global data, or if you have any direct questions for John or Jessica, please email me at pmurthy@previdere.com. And of course, we'll respond to any questions that were provided during the webinar. Thank you, everybody, and have a great day.